everybody, I'm Rhea. This is Rhea Reads. Today we're going to be talking about Sunrise on the Reaping, and why unfortunately I think it's the worst Hunger Games book. This is going to be more of a broad analysis of the book and my flaws with it. If you want to see any kind of specific immediate thoughts, be sure to check out my reading vlog. I think I should give a little bit of history about my experience with Hunger Games. I read the first series, the original trilogy, in middle school, and I was obsessed with it. And it was one of my favorite series. A couple years later is when Ballad came out. I remember the controversy when this book came out and was announced and everything, and I still think it's crazy that this book came out 10 years after the original trilogy, and I still think it's crazy that I got to read it a couple years after. But I can't even imagine if you read the original trilogy, like when it came out 10 years later, you're reading this. Like that's crazy. Lucky for me, this has been just like an extended middle school experience. I liked this book-ish. I gave it a 3.5, so I just didn't think it added that much at the time. And this reread, I came around to Ballad, and I will say also shout out, what helped me understand this book is 2 video essays, one by Hannah from A Clockwork Reader and Leonie from the book Leo. They really deep dive into this book and how it's not necessarily like a story about snow. It is, but it's mainly about the themes that Collins wanted to explore about state of nature debate and social contract. I wake up, it's the middle of summer, we're getting a new Hunger Games book, right? And I'm just seated because at this point, I don't really care what the kind of prequel books are. I'm just excited that the Hunger Games is back. I'm pretty sure at the time when it was announced, the only thing we knew was that it was going to be about the 50th Hunger Games. I really didn't think this was going to be Haymitch's perspective. I really thought it was going to be Plutarch's perspective. And he found out that it was Haymitch's perspective, and I was gagged. I was so ready. I think Collins has a reputation that she only writes when she has something to say. And I don't think this book has anything new to say. I think we can feel bad for Haymitch, but that doesn't start conversations. Compared to the original trilogy, right? And even Ballad had a lot to say too. I love Suzanne Collins' writing and the way she writes her characters and the way she writes her scenes. I mostly just have a problem that this book doesn't tackle the things that I wanted it to about Haymitch's character. I just feel like if you release a book after your original trilogy comes out 10 years after, it should be pretty close to perfect. Hello everybody, Editing Rhea here. I wanted to clarify some things. So the reason why I had certain expectations about this book was because of the hype around it and the interview and the kind of stuff about it specifically tackling propaganda. And just, you know, I'm very interested in Haymitch's character, and so a lot of the judgments I had while reading this book were based off of my preconceived notions of what this book was going to be about. I don't know if that's fair, to be honest, because I've never been in this situation where I am like obsessed over a book and I theorize about it. So, you know, I wanted to make that clear that my experience with this book and my disappointment with it is because of those expectations that I had that may have been unrealistic. I don't want to rate this 3.5 stars because I had so much fun with this book. Watch my reading vlog. I had so much fun with this book and it made me feel so many things, and it's definitely the best reading experience I've ever had. And I did love the book. Like, that's so sad for me. All I want to do, now that I read this book, all I want to do is just reread this series again. Like, she's so good at writing. I think that the thing I love most about this book is that we get to see the origin of the rebellion and how it failed. It makes Catching Fire and like the original trilogy better, because when I was reading the original trilogy, I never really thought about previous types of rebellion, because when we enter Katniss's perspective, she's so focused on survival. I love the inclusion of this first kind of rebellious act too, because when we're following Katniss in the original trilogy, I never really question why she is the face of the rebellion or anything. And here we learn that, you know, they tried to do stuff before and it didn't work out, and Katniss was the right kind of person they needed at the same time. Like, I love how Haymitch is the fire starter and Katniss is the fire. So I'm gonna get into my flaws with this book. Mainly, I think the propaganda messaging was very weak in this book, and it was just so disappointing because we already got propaganda in this series in the great book Mockingjay. That's one of the reasons I love Mockingjay, is because it's so nuanced and it's about capital propaganda but also District 13 propaganda, and how neither of them are doing the right thing. You know, District 13 is obviously better, but they're using the same kind of tactics as the Capitol. The most propaganda we get in this book, right, is about how the games are edited. But that's not a new concept. We knew that the games are edited. When we follow Katniss in the original games, like, she's always like, oh, I wonder if they cut away at this moment. I wonder if they're going to show this in the final cut. I was really gagged by the fact that Haymitch had an illegal reaping. Like, he wasn't supposed to go in. And that makes it so sad. See, Collins is really good at, like, making things emotional. But the thing is, like, he was trying to break the arena, right? And that was why it wasn't just the force field, right? It was the fact that he was trying to break the arena, that Snow had everybody he loved killed. Like, that is something I would not expect going into it, because when he's going into games, he's not trying to survive, he's trying to break the arena, right? Anytime we're with Katniss in the arena, she's trying to survive. She's not thinking about anything else. However, when we're in this, he's thinking about how to beat the Hunger Games, and I'm like, oh my god. I don't understand his plan to break the games at all. How is blowing up the arena gonna break the games? It's not. And again, like, we know that because it doesn't work out. I mean, Catching Fire is like one of my favorite books of all time, and I still don't understand why Katniss broke the arena. Because even after they broke the arena, and luckily she got taken by District 13 because there was like a rebellion waiting for them to do something so they could take it out. But Katniss and Joanna still got kidnapped by the Capitol. I just don't understand the whole breaking the arena thing, because that's not gonna stop the games. And maybe that's part of the propaganda, is that he was told that if he breaks the arena, like, he is gonna break the games. But like, that, I feel like if that was propaganda, then that should have been better. I feel like he could have been persuaded by the rebellion, you know? Or what was the rebellion at this point? He could have been persuaded by Plutarch or whatever. He's like, because even he and Macy talk about, like, oh, if we're the worst, Victor, if we're the worst, they're not gonna want games anymore. I'm like, I don't think that's how it works. And I think they have a different perception of what keeps the games going on than what actually does. And I think that's interesting, but it's not explored. I just thought there was going to be something else, like a big twist at the end of the games. I thought Haymitch wasn't going to win the games. I thought there was going to be, like, this entire thing that, like, the Capitol, like, killed a person who was supposed to win, or, like, whatever. Like, obviously, you know, he is the victor, right? But I just thought maybe that he wouldn't be, because I know he would survive the games. I just didn't know exactly how, and, like, the whole, like, circumstances around it. Especially considering from the start, he's like, oh, the game makers aren't gonna let me live. And I'm like, yeah, like, you know, if I was in the Capitol, like, I wouldn't want this rebellious kid, like, winning the games. But they let him win, right? And maybe they let him win so that Snow can kill everybody he loves, and so it's an example. But, like, I don't understand why they let him win. I think there's also propaganda in the fact that Haymitch is trying to present himself as this, like, arrogant, cocky guy who's just, like, in the games, and you think he's, like, better than everything, right? He's a sweetheart. He takes care of so many tributes, and that just doesn't make the final cut, because it doesn't fit into what the Capitol wants him to be. But also, you know, he kind of created that persona for himself, even though he is not happy about the way that the Capitol edited it. He was technically the one that created that persona of himself. And I really like the quote that was like, I entered as a piglet and exited as the beast they thought of me, or something. Especially considering he's so rebellious, right? The Capitol just rips that out of him. And even in the games, he and Macy constantly talking about doing things they want to do, not for the Capitol. And yet when we meet him, and when he's mentoring Katniss, all he does is tell them to do what the Capitol wants. Collins is trying to do this thing of, like, oh, you can't tell if it's what you think or what the Capitol thinks. And we see that with Luella and Lulu, like, when they're, like, both being shipped 12, Haymitch is asked, like, do you know which one is which? And he's like, no. And then he realizes that the Capitol succeeded, that they were able to convince people that there was no difference. And but I feel like we should have done more at that, because, like, ultimately what happened with Haymitch is that he became who the Capitol wanted him to. He was only doing for survival, but then it ultimately ended up becoming who he was. Katniss's impression of him is that he could have saved people if he wanted to, but he just didn't, because he was too drunk to, like, deal with sponsors, and he didn't give good advice, in her words. And, you know, he put it together for Katniss and Peeta, but there's 23 years of tributes that he didn't do that for. Propaganda is an interesting message. Again, I think it's shallow because we only focus on the Capitol's propaganda. I think another side of the propaganda is what are the citizens seeing, because, you know, when Haymitch sees his edited games, he's like wondering, oh, the Capitol people saw that this wasn't real, but do they care? Do they really care if it's fake or real? And I think that's, you know, that's the end of that. But I also think District 12 specifically, Like, what do they think of his games? Because we know, like, they tried to help him, and then eventually he became so, he just lost so much that he shot everybody out. When Katniss's mom speaks out about the games, she only talks about Maceley Donner and the fact that, oh, I had a friend that got raped that year, Maceley Donner. She doesn't talk about Haymitch at all. And maybe it's implicit that, like, oh, like, that was part of the propaganda, that they were practically family before, but the Capitol convinced them that he was just not somebody worth being saved, or like whatever, you know what I mean? Like, the Capitol convinced the District 12 that he was no longer like one of their friends. And especially, I was really surprised that we didn't get any kind of mention of District 12 being stricter, because I assumed that happened around this time, because we know Snow hates when 12 wins. But there was that remark between Haymitch and Mrs. Everdeen in Catching Fire after Gale gets whipped, and they're like, oh, we've seen this happen before. So like we don't see this happen. And even in like the first chapter, Haymitch is like, oh, I go to the woods, oh, the peacekeepers are chill. And I was like, okay, like we're definitely gonna get like a stricter peacekeeper. We don't see that. And the second theme that's explored is the easiness of which many are governed by the few. And I just don't really think that applies to the tributes or the districts. I kind of get how it does, right? They have that one scene where the peacekeepers take the District 1 guy away, and then Haymitch realizes that the tributes outnumber the peacekeepers, right? And so they could fight them, they could take them on, but they don't. And then Plutarch sees this, he's like, why do you guys accept this? I think that the easiness to be governed by the few is a very relevant topic, but I just don't think it applies to the tributes in the districts, because they're just so strict, and they're thinking about survival, they're not thinking about rebellion, right? So that just wasn't really explored, and maybe it's because it was implicit. I think even the fact that it's 48 tributes, twice the amount of tributes, and they still can't do anything. And I think the card reading or something, it was like something along the lines of like, numbers can't outnumber the Capitol. I think maybe that scene where the game makers come into the games and then they're outnumbered. Which is even like frozen when that happens, because he's so used to just being governed by the Capitol. But again, like, we don't get really that much, as much as I wanted with that. And then the like kind of third message that Collins is trying to put, the whole David Hume philosophy about how you like shouldn't just accept things for the way they are, is what I took from it. And I think it's what Lenore took from it too, because she was like, we just have to like make change, we can't just sit here with this. I love Lenore. I again really love the themes about rebellion in this book. I love how we get to see the origin of the rebellion and how it failed. But again, like, the rebellion doesn't happen until this book, right? But even then, Haymitch's promise to Lenore is that he is gonna like keep the sun from rising on reaping day, right? Does he do that? I'm not victim blaming him, right? He goes through a lot. I can never hate him. Does he do that? Does he help the tributes? The whole like keeping the sun from not rising on reaping day, like the fact that he is now implicit in the system that he promised Lenore that he wouldn't be. And I'm not saying this about, I just don't think he really tried to escape that. Katniss is an unreliable narrator, right? But she says that like District 12 could have a chance if Haymitch just tried, but he just doesn't because he's drunk all the time and he can't get close to sponsors, so they don't sponsor him. And if you watch a reading vlog, you can see my eyes just slowly dying as we realize that we're not gonna get to see Haymitch's mentor journeys. I really thought we would, because the whole point of Sunrise on the Reaping is, I thought it was gonna be about multiple reapings, and I thought it was gonna be about him coming to the terms of like his mentorship. Does he keep his promise to Lenore? Does he really have that rebellion in him this entire time? Because like, we don't know when his rebellion starts. We don't know when he ends up rebelling in the original trilogy. What happened? Like, why did he suddenly trust Katniss? And maybe he suddenly trusted Katniss because he was friends with her parents. And now if I reread the entire series, I'm just gonna think about Haymitch's relationship with Katniss, because I never really thought about it before, but now it's just so much deeper. And I love that. This book is fanfiction, right? And I'm not saying that's a bad thing normally. If Collins has this reputation that she only puts out a book when she has something she needs to talk about, I don't really think this is it. I would be okay if this came out like 2 years after the original trilogy and we don't have any reactions to, oh, like, any kind of philosophy. I feel like anytime you reread any of these books, you're like, oh, like, war isn't good, like, oh, like, they shouldn't be killing children, or stuff like that. Like, here, this book wouldn't change my life, and there's not the themes I would bring up and start conversations about this book, unless it was to back up what's already here. If this is what we're gonna get, I think she just needs to stop having a reputation where it's like she only puts out books where she has something she needs to write. Do I think this is a cash grab? Yes. You know, the thing is, I don't know if this is controversial. She finished this book in June. I think she was heavily influenced on the reception of Ballad. And that makes me so sad because I didn't love Ballad initially, but I come around to it, girl. I came around to it. I don't want to see Haymitch's game specifically. I want her to delve into like specific themes and then tie that into games. So this book really made me appreciate Ballad a lot more. I just love the fact that Collins, even though it was like 10 years after, she wrote a story that she wanted to, and that ultimately successfully conveyed the themes she was trying to present. I also wanted to say, as somebody who prefers Ballad, one, because its messaging is a lot more blatant and they literally have conversations throughout the book about what the themes are, and Snow's whole journey is like figuring out the different sides of these themes. This is more subtle, which I do appreciate, but I also just think it gets lost because we asked for Haymitch's story, you know? Like, this is on us. But because of that, we're just kind of blindsided by the fact that it's a story about somebody we care about. And so I think Snow's story does a better job of being a prequel and being a standalone, in the sense that you can read Ballad by yourself if you want to. Like, there's nothing you don't need to read the original trilogy, but like it just contextualizes a lot. Whereas for Haymitch's story, like if you end in Sunrise, you just don't like happiness. You have to read the original trilogy to find any kind of satisfaction with his arc. I think she's lying when she's saying I don't want to call her out. I just don't, like, that makes no sense that she's like, oh, like propaganda, submission of view, like, yeah, Haymitch's games. I'm like, okay, Haymitch's games, but like, why is Haymitch the person? Like, Haymitch is not the person you should do that with. And I feel like this story, this general story, could be in this. I think it should have been in Plutarch's perspective. I really do. Like, since day one when this was announced, I really wanted this to be Plutarch's book. And I just think propaganda. He makes propaganda. Like, that's his whole character is about propaganda. And also, especially because he's like double-sided. Whatever, even he literally becomes head game maker and he is like one of the main people of the rebellion, right? He has to influence both sides, that he's on their side. Plutarch's character is so interesting because he comes off from a wealthy family that has everything, but yet he's able to have empathy for just people. And you know what happened there. Like, I want to know. If this was a Plutarch break, this would just be so much better. I don't know why Collins is so afraid to write about the Capitol. Like, this would have been better if we got to understand the Capitol. I still would have liked to see Snow's uprise in the Capitol, but maybe it's just not that interesting. The fact that we know there's uprise in the Capitol. In this book specifically, there's like propaganda in the Capitol. And then, you know, Plutarch wants to rebel, but then there's also that red-headed Avox girl who was from the Capitol. Like, she escaped. So what's going on in the Capitol? I think a Plutarch book, specifically like what's going on in the Capitol versus what's going on in the district, could really show propaganda and how what Katniss perceives about the Capitol isn't right, you know. And we know that something's not right in the Capitol. We just don't know what. Like, I think the Capitol fits the easiness to be governed by the few thing a bit more than the districts, mostly because the districts we know of, it's very like survivalist. They're thinking about rebellion, but they also don't agree with like anything the Capitol says. I don't think they're easily being exploited. It's taking a lot of peacekeepers and a lot of effort to keep the districts in line. However, we don't know how much it takes for the Capitol to stay in line. And we know that there is unrest in the Capitol, but we also know that there's characters like Effie and like the prep team who are just so blindsided by what the Capitol does, and they just don't question it. And it's not like the games benefits them. They still have this mindset that the games are useful, and the fact that they just don't question it is more relevant. And I also just think the whole Hunger Games in general relates to the Panem origin of the districts providing the bread and entertainment, and the reason why the people with power want the Capitol watch it is because they want people to be entertained and they don't want people to think about their problems. I think it's most limiting about this book is its structure. Like I said, I wanted the aftermath. Like, the games are my favorite part of any of the books. That's why I love Catching Fire, is because so, like, 2/3 of the book is the build-up to the games. And granted, Mockingjay is literally the aftermath, but then this should have been like a 2-book parter, you know? We don't have to limit to one book. I don't understand why these books have to be lead up and then games and then, like, aftermath. Like, this book is also so long. There's like 100-page difference between these 2 books, right? And my complaint is that we didn't get any kind of mention of Haymitch mentoring. It's limiting that you can only focus on 1 year in these books. His story is just so much more than 1 year. It's what happens over time. It's also called Sunrise on the Reaping. We only get one reaping. Obviously the message is that, like, Haymitch, like, you have to stop this from happening in the future. And that happens in the original trilogy. Like, this makes, I don't know. I think the name is cool. I think the whole aesthetic is cool about this book. I think this needed to go to a few more rounds editing. I think people need to say no. And I feel like that's mean, but that's just how I feel. I like the epilogue, but I was honestly surprised that we got a Mockingjay chapter, a chapter from, like, this point in the story, just because Haymitch's whole arc is throughout the trilogy that we know of, right? He doesn't have a character arc in this book. It's about him being hopeful, being happy, and then that everything being taken away from him, and now he's just sad. But at the end, you realize, oh, he's happy and fulfilled again. And it's like, we never got to see his rebellion come back because of Katniss and Peeta, because that's in the original trilogy. I think they're gonna cut out some of this in the movie, because in my opinion, right, he like 3 times in a row he teams up with a 12-year-old and then they die. And, like, I feel like in the parade, the well scene, I don't love that she dies, but I love that scene where he, like, takes her body and, like, showcases it to snow. I love that scene. We have the Lulu scene where she dies next to him, and then after that we have Amber scene where she dies. And I feel like they could take Lulu out. They could keep the plot point of Lulu in. I just feel like she could die off screen. And then Amber, I feel like they could keep that in. But then after that we have Welly, right? I think that just dragged out a little bit too much, because we know that Welly's not gonna win. And then after Welly, he has to watch. Wait, is it after Welly? No. And then after Amber, it's Macely, and then he has to go through that thing with Macely, which I like. Then we have to, like, go through the whole Welly thing. And I feel like he could cut Lulu and Welly. I feel like I understand the whole point of him obviously having to be with all these people and lose all these people. It just got repetitive because we were doing the same thing, and he was like, oh, I don't want to be what the Captain wants me to be. Oh, they're never gonna let me live. Oh, I'm gonna blow up the arena. And it just wasn't as engaging and thought-provoking as I wanted it to be. I also just think that this book is trying to be a movie, and we know it's gonna be a movie. And there's a lot of things that, like, I'm sure the movies aren't gonna keep. Themes are easier to adapt because of how shallow they are. My other thing with the movies is that they are movies that are trying to take away as much political stuff as they can so they can just make it an action movie and mass market it. They're not trying to tell a story, right? And that's ironic. The whole point of the Hunger Games is to distract Panem citizens so they can't focus on any of the actual problems and what's going on. And when you adapt these books, then you take them and you just make a spectacle out of them, and you're creating less conversation with them. You're just providing entertainment and giving us less to talk about so we won't fix our issues. It doesn't have to be that deep, right? But they are, because these books, these stories are about critiquing entertainment. And if we can't critique the movies for what they are, then I think we failed to see the message of these books. I also forgot to talk about the cameos. So you guys can see my reactions to chapter 1. I hated the mention of Lucy Gray because I feel like the point of her story is that we don't know what happens to her. Does it matter? No, but they brought her up. You know, it's natural that Haymitch wonders about her. I still have no idea why they included that scene of Haymitch watching her interview, like when basically he was imprisoned, like after the games, and he was like, oh, the TV turned on and there she was probably the first victor. And I'm like, I thought everything about Lucy Gray was erased. Where did this footage come from? Like, I don't know. I thought that was a little bit too convenient. We just know as readers that Lenore Dove obviously learned about her and she can live on through her. And I like that, you know, because Haymitch knows, I'm sure he told Katniss and Peeta at the end, because of that whole epilogue. And then we have Why Are Speedy and Max, and oh my god, I hate Snow because I think it makes sense and I love that they're here. I think it would have been cool to see another Victor that we didn't know of. The fact that these Haymitch, Beatty, and Mags end up being Katniss's alliance. Please let me know what your thoughts are, what you agree, what you disagree with, any kind of thoughts you have for this book, so we can chat about it in the comments below. Once you're done with that, please like this video, subscribe to the channel for more content, and I will see you next time. Oh, and follow me on Instagram.